She was just a poor maid trying to feed her hungry children. But when she took her boss's leftover food home, what happened next left the entire town speechless. This is a story of hunger, heartbreak, and a truth too painful to forget. The sun was already sinking behind the dusty rooftops of the city when Maria trudged down the narrow lane toward the grand house at the end of the street. Her worn-out slippers scraped the pavement, and her faded dress clung to her thin frame, heavy with sweat and exhaustion. The day had been long, but it was like every other day, cleaning, scrubbing, washing dishes, and doing her best to keep her employer's house spotless while her own home fell apart. She paused outside the tall, iron gate of the Ramirez mansion and took a deep breath before entering. The air smelled of freshly cut grass and jasmine, a scent she would never afford for herself. Inside, everything was perfection. The marble floors gleamed, chandeliers sparkled, and the scent of expensive perfume lingered in the air. "Maria, you're late again," came the sharp voice of Mrs. Ramirez from the hallway. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Maria said softly, lowering her head. "The bus broke down. I had to walk." Mrs. Ramirez clicked her tongue. "Excuses, always excuses. Go to the kitchen and make sure everything is clean before I get back. We're hosting guests tonight and I don't want to see a single spot." "Yes, ma'am," Maria whispered. She hurried to the kitchen where the cook was already shouting orders. Trays of roast chicken, vegetables, and pastries lined the counters. The smell made her stomach twist painfully. She hadn't eaten since morning, but she dared not ask for a bite. Her children, Lena aged 7 and Mateo only 5, had probably gone to bed hungry again. The thought made her throat tighten. "Maria, wipe the counters," the cook barked. "And don't touch anything. These dishes cost more than your salary." "Yes, ma'am," she murmured again. By the time the dinner ended, it was close to midnight. Maria stood quietly by the kitchen door as the guests laughed and drank wine in the dining hall. She saw the untouched plates coming back to the kitchen. Half a roast chicken here, an untouched slice of cake there. Perfectly good food, but it would all go into the bin as always. Her hands trembled slightly as she watched the cook scrape leftovers into the trash. Each piece of chicken, each spoonful of rice felt like a small death to her. She could already see her children's tired faces, their small bodies shivering under a torn blanket. When the others left, Maria stayed behind to clean. The house was silent now except for the ticking of the clock. On the counter sat a large plate of leftover food from Mr. Ramirez's meal, chicken, rice, and vegetables. Still warm. She stood there for a long moment, her mind at war with her heart. "No one will know," she whispered. "They always throw it away anyway." Her hands shook as she wrapped the food carefully in a napkin and slipped it into her bag. Her conscience screamed at her, but hunger was louder. That night, she walked home under the dim streetlights, her bag clutched tightly to her chest. The air smelled of rain and dust, and her legs ached with every step. But her heart fluttered with a small spark of joy. Her children wouldn't go to bed hungry tonight. When she reached home, a single-room shack with a leaking roof, Lena and Mateo ran to her, their eyes lighting up. "Mama, you're home." "Yes, my loves," she said softly, her voice breaking. "And Mama brought food." Their eyes widened in surprise. "Real food?" Mateo asked, his little hands clutching her dress. Maria smiled through her tears. "Yes, real food. Look, chicken, rice, even vegetables." She reheated the food on their tiny stove, and the aroma filled the small space. They sat together on the floor, laughing and eating. For the first time in weeks, the children's laughter filled the room. "It's delicious, Mama," Lena said, her mouth full. Maria nodded, feeling tears well up. "Eat, my loves. Eat as much as you want." When they were done, Maria tucked them into bed and kissed their foreheads. "Sleep well, my angels," she whispered. "Tomorrow will be better." But tomorrow would never come. The next morning, the sun rose over the city, and the neighbors woke to a strange silence coming from Maria's house. Normally, the sound of the children playing would echo down the street. But today it was quiet. Too quiet. Mrs. Alvarez, the woman who lived next door, knocked on the door. No answer. She pushed gently and it creaked open. Her scream echoed through the alley. There on the floor lay Maria and her 2 children, still, pale, lifeless. The half-empty plate of food sat nearby. Within hours, police cars surrounded the shack. Neighbors gathered, whispering, crying. No one could understand what had happened. "She was such a good woman," one said. "She never hurt anyone. She just wanted to feed her children," another murmured. When the coroner arrived, he took one look at the food and frowned. "We'll have to test it," he said quietly. By afternoon, word had spread. Maria, the maid from the Ramirez mansion, had died mysteriously along with her children. And in the mansion at the end of the street, Mrs. Ramirez sat sipping her coffee when the phone rang. "Yes," she answered impatiently. "Mrs. Ramirez, this is the police. We believe one of your employees, Maria, passed away last night, along with her 2 children." The cup slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. "What? What are you saying?" The officer's voice was grave. "We found leftover food from your household in her home. We'll need you to come down to the station." Mrs. Ramirez felt the blood drain from her face. "My God," she whispered. But deep down she remembered something. Something that made her chest tighten with dread. The food she had served that night wasn't from their usual supplier. She had ordered it from a new caterer. And earlier that evening, she had complained to her husband that the chicken tasted strange. Now that strange taste echoed in her mind like a ghost. Mrs. Ramirez sat frozen in her grand living room, staring blankly at the police officer across from her. The house felt different now, cold, suffocating, stripped of its usual elegance. The chandeliers still sparkled above her, but their light seemed cruel. Every flicker reminded her of Maria's quiet face, always humble, always polite, and now, gone. "Mrs. Ramirez," the officer said calmly, setting down his notepad, "we just need you to tell us what was served at dinner last night." She pressed a trembling hand against her chest. "It was a small dinner. Just my husband, our son, and me. The cook made roast chicken, vegetables, rice, and salad. But the chicken wasn't from our usual place." "Where was it from?" "From a new caterer," she said softly. "Golden Spoon Catering. They offered us a discount. I thought I was being practical." The officer wrote that down. "And did anyone else eat from that same batch?" She hesitated. "Maria, our maid, cleared the plates. She must have taken some leftovers home." His pen stopped. "So the food she took was leftover from your dinner?" She nodded slowly. He sighed. "Mrs. Ramirez, we believe the food was contaminated, possibly with a strong pesticide or cleaning agent. The lab results will confirm it soon, but this doesn't look like a coincidence." Her hands flew to her mouth. "Are you saying I poisoned them?" "No, ma'am," he said carefully. "We're not saying that. But it's possible the food was mishandled or intentionally tampered with before it reached your table." Her stomach churned. "Intentionally?" He nodded grimly. "Yes. Someone may have poisoned it on purpose." Tears welled up in her eyes. "Oh God, that poor woman. Her children." He closed his notebook. "We'll need to talk to everyone in your household, including your cook and delivery staff." After the officers left, Mrs. Ramirez slumped into her armchair. For the first time in her life she felt powerless. She had always believed money could fix anything, but now, sitting there in her silk gown, she felt like a stranger in her own life. Her husband, a stern man in his 50s, entered the room. "What's going on, Angela?" "The police called me. They said Maria's dead?" She nodded weakly. "Her and her children. They think it was the food." He frowned. "The food?" "Yes," she whispered. "The chicken we had last night." His jaw tightened. "That's impossible. We ate it too." She met his eyes. "We didn't eat as much as she took. Maybe it was from the part that was spoiled or poisoned. I don't know." He turned away, running a hand through his graying hair. "This will ruin us if people find out," he muttered. "Ruined?" she repeated, her voice trembling. "3 people are dead, Carlos. A mother and her children. And you're worried about our reputation?" He didn't answer. That night she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Maria's gentle face, her hands scrubbing the floors, her soft smile whenever she said, "Good night, ma'am." At dawn, she got dressed and left the house quietly, ignoring her husband's calls. She took a bus to the outskirts of the city where Maria lived. The neighborhood was nothing like her world. Muddy streets, tiny shacks, children running barefoot. She felt eyes on her as she walked, her expensive clothes out of place among the poverty. When she reached Maria's house, her heart nearly broke. The small door was covered in flowers and candles. People were gathered outside, whispering prayers. A photograph of Maria and her 2 children rested against the wall. Mrs. Alvarez, the neighbor, spotted her and frowned. You're her employer, aren't you?" Mrs. Ramirez nodded, struggling to find words. "You have some nerve coming here," the woman snapped. "If you'd paid her properly, she wouldn't have had to steal your leftovers." She didn't steal," Mrs. Ramirez said quickly. "I didn't know she took the food. But please believe me, I never meant for this to happen." The neighbor's expression softened slightly. "Then why are you here?" "To make things right," she whispered. "If I can." Mrs. Alvarez crossed her arms. You can't bring them back, but you can help bury them. And so she did. That afternoon, Mrs. Ramirez stood by the graveside as the priest said the final prayers. She had paid for everything, the coffins, the flowers, the service, but she felt no pride in it. The guilt inside her was heavier than the earth that covered their bodies. As the crowd dispersed, an old man approached her. His clothes were ragged, his beard unkempt, but his eyes were sharp. "You're the rich lady, yes?" he asked. She nodded. "You should know," he said in a low voice. "Maria didn't deserve this. She helped everyone in this neighborhood. When my wife was sick, she gave us her own medicine. When my son lost his job, she brought him food. She was a saint." Tears streamed down Mrs. Ramirez's cheeks. "I didn't know. I never even asked about her life." The old man nodded slowly. "That's the problem with you rich people. You see us cleaning your floors, but you never see our hearts." She lowered her head, unable to reply. When she returned home that night, she called the police again. "Please," she said, "I want to know who made that food. I want to see the caterer myself." The officer hesitated. "We're still investigating, ma'am. But if you insist, we can give you their address." 2 hours later, she stood outside a small, shabby restaurant at the edge of the industrial district. The sign above the door read Golden Spoon Catering, its gold paint peeling away. Inside, a young man greeted her nervously. "Can I help you?" "I'm Angela Ramirez," she said. "You catered our dinner last Friday." His face paled. "Oh, yes, ma'am." "The food was poisoned," she said sharply. 3 people are dead." He stammered, I didn't know. We just prepared the dishes. We didn't do anything wrong." "Then who handled the chicken?" He hesitated. "A new supplier, ma'am. A man named Victor. He came cheap, said he could get us fresh meat every week." "Where can I find him?" The man swallowed hard. "I don't know. He stopped answering our calls after we paid him." Her anger began to rise. "You're telling me you bought food from a stranger?" He nodded, trembling. "We didn't know it would end like this." She left the restaurant, her hands shaking. She could feel the pieces falling together, each one worse than the last. Someone had done this. Someone had intentionally delivered poisoned food. But who would want to harm her family? That night, she sat alone in the dark, thinking. Then, as the clock struck midnight, she remembered something her husband had said just a few days earlier. "We need to cut down on costs, Angela. Fire the old staff. Find cheaper suppliers." Her heart froze. Could he have been the one to approve that supplier? She picked up the phone and called the police again. "I think I know who to ask next," she said quietly. That night, Lila sat in silence beside the flickering candle. The walls of her small house felt heavier than usual, pressing against her chest like an invisible weight. The silence was unbearable, broken only by the soft hum of insects outside and the occasional cough from her youngest, Tomas. She looked at their faces, pale and tired, and her heart twisted with guilt. They hadn't eaten since yesterday. She could feel the weakness in her own limbs, but she pushed it aside. Her children mattered more. The few coins she had earned last week were gone, spent on medicine that hadn't worked and rent that only delayed the landlord's anger. At that moment, she thought of the leftovers she had seen in the bin behind the grand kitchen earlier that day. Trays of untouched food thrown away, still smelling of spices and butter. The image burned in her mind, cruel and tempting. Her conscience fought with her desperation. "What if someone sees me?" she whispered to herself. "But what if my children starve?" Another voice answered inside her. At midnight, while the mansion slept and the city's lights dimmed, Lila crept out of her home. The moonlight guided her through the narrow streets until she reached the mansion's back gate. Her hands trembled as she pushed it open, the creak echoing like thunder in her ears. Inside, everything was silent. She tiptoed past the laundry line, her heart racing with every shadow. When she reached the kitchen door, she found it slightly ajar, left open by one of the careless servants. The smell hit her first, roasted meat, garlic, herbs. Her stomach ached. She walked inside, eyes darting around. There it was, a large covered dish left on the counter. She hesitated for a second, whispering, "Forgive me, God," before lifting the lid. A piece of roasted chicken, some vegetables, half a loaf of bread. Her eyes filled with tears. She quickly wrapped it in a cloth and slipped out, closing the door behind her. Her heart pounded as she hurried home, clutching the warm bundle to her chest like a stolen treasure. When she entered her little home, her children stirred. "Mama?" Tomas murmured, rubbing his eyes. "Shoo," she whispered softly, smiling through tears. "I brought us dinner." They sat around the small wooden table, the candlelight flickering against their tired faces. The smell filled the room, and for a moment, it felt like joy had returned. Lila served small portions to each child, saving the smallest for herself. As they ate, their faces lit up with relief. Even Tomas smiled, his cheeks moving for the first time in days. Lila felt tears in her eyes as she watched them. For a moment, it didn't matter that she had stolen. It didn't matter what tomorrow would bring. Her children were fed. But that night, as they lay down to sleep, something strange happened. Her oldest daughter, Maria, complained of a sharp pain in her stomach. Lila thought it was hunger, or maybe the food was too rich after so long. She gave her water and told her to rest. An hour later, Tomas began crying. He clutched his belly, twisting in pain. Sweat poured down his forehead. Lila panicked, rushing to hold him. Then the baby started crying, a high, shrill sound that filled the small room. Lila's heart raced. She tried to calm them, rocking them, praying, whispering every verse she could remember. But soon her own body began to tremble. Her stomach churned violently. The room spun. She gasped, feeling her vision blur. The candle flickered. She could hear her children's cries fading into the distance. Then everything went dark. Morning came quietly. The sun rose over the town, casting a golden light on the slums. The neighbor, an old woman named Rosa, came by to check on Lila. She knocked once, twice. No answer. She pushed the door open and screamed. Inside, the little family lay still. The half-eaten food was on the table, untouched since the night before. Flies buzzed around the plates. Rosa dropped to her knees, trembling as tears filled her eyes. The police came. The doctor came. People gathered outside the house, whispering in horror. The news spread fast. Lila, the maid from the mansion, and her children are dead. The doctor examined the food and frowned. Poison, he muttered. It must have been poisoned. But no one knew why. At the mansion, the lady of the house, Mrs. Davenport, was having her morning tea when her husband rushed in. "Did you hear about the maid?" he asked, his voice shaking. "What maid?" she asked coldly, not looking up from her cup. "Lila. The one who used to clean the kitchen." Mrs. Davenport's hand froze midair. "What happened to her?" "She and her children, they died last night." The teacup slipped from her hand, shattering on the marble floor. Her face turned pale. "What? How?" "They say it was food poisoning." Her breath quickened. "That can't be. The only food left over last night was the roast chicken." Her voice broke. "The same one I told Cook to throw away because the rats had gotten into it." She sank into her chair, trembling. "Oh my God, what have I done?" The room fell silent. Outside, the sound of laughter from her garden seemed cruel now. Mrs. Davenport pressed her hands to her face. Tears welled up, but they didn't bring comfort. Guilt clawed at her chest like a living thing. That night, she couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lila's face, tired, kind, desperate. She remembered how Lila used to smile even when she wasn't paid on time. How she would hum quietly while cleaning, how her children sometimes waited by the gate to walk her home. Mrs. Davenport couldn't bear it. She got up, put on her coat, and walked through the quiet streets until she reached the poor neighborhood. The police tape still hung around the small house. She stepped inside despite their warnings. The smell of death lingered. The little beds. The toys. The untouched food. She covered her mouth as tears streamed down her cheeks. On the table was a small folded paper, Lila's prayer book. Inside it, written in shaky handwriting, were the words, "God, please forgive me for what I am about to do. My children are hungry." Mrs. Davenport collapsed to her knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Outside, the neighbors watched silently. Some pitied her, others turned away. Because no matter how much she cried, nothing could bring them back. Mrs. Davenport didn't return home that night. Her husband searched for her until dawn, driving through the winding streets of the old district where Lila had once lived. He found her sitting by the little house as the sun rose, her clothes covered in dust, her eyes swollen from tears. When she saw him, she didn't move. "She was trying to feed her children," she whispered. "And I killed them." He knelt beside her, trying to calm her, but she shook her head. "You don't understand, Harold. I told the cook to throw it away. I never asked if he did. I didn't care. I just went to bed while she was out here starving." Her voice cracked with each word. "That food was poison. Rats had eaten from it. And she took it because she was desperate. Because I didn't pay her enough. Because I didn't even notice her pain." She looked at him, her eyes hollow. "I killed them with my indifference." The funeral was small. A wooden coffin for Lila and 3 smaller ones beside hers. The priest spoke softly, his voice trembling in the morning air. The neighbors wept quietly, but Mrs. Davenport didn't cry. She stood there like a statue, pale and distant, holding a bouquet of white lilies. When the last shovel of dirt fell, she placed the flowers on the grave and whispered, "I'm sorry." After that day, she never returned to her old life. The mansion stood empty for months. The servants were dismissed, the garden overgrown. Some said she had gone mad. Others said she'd gone to live in the convent by the river. But the truth was simpler, she couldn't live with herself. Weeks later, a letter arrived at the town church. It was from Mrs. Davenport, addressed to Father Benedict. Inside she wrote, "Every night I see her face. Every night I hear her children crying. I thought I was a good woman because I gave to charity, because I said my prayers. But I was blind. There was a woman cleaning my floors who hadn't eaten in days, and I never noticed. I threw away food she could have lived on. Tell the people of this town, stop throwing away what others would die for. Feed the hungry before you feed your pride." The priest read her letter during Sunday Mass. The whole town listened in silence. For the first time, they saw their own reflection in her words, cruel in their comfort, blind in their privilege. In the months that followed, things began to change. The church started a small kitchen for the poor. Families began setting aside food each week for those who needed it. Children were taught to share, to give before wasting. And at the edge of town, where the graves of Lila and her children rested, someone built a small stone marker. Read, "In memory of Lila and her children. They died hungry but not forgotten." No one knew who placed it there. But sometimes, late at night, when the moon was full, people said they saw a woman dressed in black kneeling by the grave, whispering prayers through her tears. Years passed. The mansion was sold. New people came and went. But the story of the poor maid who stole leftover food to feed her family, and the tragedy that followed, lived on. It was told to children at bedtime, not as a tale of theft or sin, but as a lesson in compassion. Because in the end, it wasn't greed that killed Lila. It was the world's silence. And somewhere, in the quiet of the earth, perhaps her soul finally rested, knowing that her death had woken hearts that had long been asleep.